Hi there, folks, and welcome to another edition of Israel Explained. Netanyahu accepted the bridging position edition. So today there's been a lot of interesting developments with the ceasefire, and I will try to put them into some coherent order. So just yesterday, there was a piece in the Israeli media written by Nahum Barnea, who's our number one columnist in Israel, at least back in the day. And he was saying that Netanyahu doesn't want a deal and Sinwar doesn't want a deal and there won't be a deal. And a lot of people agreed with that. And all of a sudden today, Anthony Blinken met with Netanyahu. They had a 3 hour meeting, and there was a massive breakthrough in the meeting. To everyone's surprise, Netanyahu actually accepted the bridging position of the United States after some amendments. So Blinken came out and he said that Israel had accepted it. He said it's incumbent on Hamas to do the same. The most important step is for Hamas to say yes. So it's now official. Israel said yes. Hamas has yet to answer. Looks very much, as we'll discuss, like they're going to say no. And more importantly, Netanyahu agreed. His office released the following statement, quote, "The Prime Minister reiterated Israel's commitment to the current American proposal on the release of our hostages, which takes into account Israel's security needs, which he strongly insists on." So this is the first time that Israel has fully backed the proposal. It came out with an official statement. So really there's no going back at this point without losing a ton of credibility. Now, there's two ways of looking at this development, and they're not mutually exclusive. My guess is there's a little bit of both. One, it shows a genuine Israeli interest in reaching a hostage deal. We know that even though Netanyahu has his reservations about a hostage deal, his cabinet supports a hostage deal. 60 something percent of the Israeli public supports a hostage deal. And saying no to a generous American proposal would have some serious costs. It's also a good PR move for Israel to manage to get a deal that looks good for Israel, say yes, and put the onus on Hamas. That way, if Israel needs to escalate, it will have a certain amount of leeway from the United States for doing so. Now, as to the substance of the bridging position offered by the mediators, it hasn't been released yet. All we have are reports, but the reports in the Israeli media, in the US media, Arab media, all seem to more or less agree on what happened. Netanyahu's hardball way of negotiating in this has worked. The main point of difference between the US and Israel was an Israeli presence in Philadelphia. It was clear that Israel was willing to waive the Netzarim checkpoint, but it wasn't willing to waive Philadelphia. And by the way, with very good reason. Philadelphia is the source of arms and supplies for Hamas, and Israel leaving Philadelphia in 2005 as part of the disengagement was a mistake that led to October 7th and to all the rockets that have been shot in Israel in the interim. So I have to give credit to Netanyahu for standing up for that because he seems to have gotten the concession from the United States that the IDF will remain on the Philadelphia corridor. It will not operate the actual Rafah crossing. That will be operated by the Palestinian Authority with Israeli oversight. But that means Israel will have a presence, making it much harder, not necessarily impossible, but much harder to smuggle arms into Gaza. So here's the content of what Netanyahu and the mediators have agreed to in that bridging position. Now, remember, before I talk about the details, this is added on top of the existing three-phase framework that has already been presented, that Netanyahu agreed to on May 27th, that Biden presented later on, so on and so forth, calling for the release of the most desperately needed hostages, the humanitarian hostages in the first phase, the rest in the second phase, and the bodies in the third phase. So all the hostages will be accounted for if all the phases go through. But here's what the bridging position said. One, only in phase 2 will there be a discussion of a permanent ceasefire. Hamas wanted that to be guaranteed from the start, so that's a win for Israel. Only once the first phase is completed, then the ceasefire turns permanent. There's been a lot of talk about this as if there's no ceasefire, but no, Israel here is agreeing to talk about that, but only in the second phase. Of course, it's no secret that Netanyahu wants to restart the war after the first phase, which is one of the reasons Hamas is so insistent on having it in the first phase. Two, as we mentioned, the IDF will remain in the Philadelphia with reduced forces. PA will run the Rafah crossing. That's the biggest victory for Israel in these talks and made the Israeli insistence quite successful. Three, Israel will supervise those returning to the north without a checking mechanism. So that's in Netzarim. That's basically a face-saving measure. There's probably going to be some sort of way that Israel can check cameras. I don't know. Not clear what that mechanism will be. It won't be effective. Already the north is full of armed terrorists, and certainly when Israel withdraws from the Tsarim, there will be more armed terrorists. There's nothing Israel can really do about that. And that whole idea of a checkpoint in Netzarim, a lot of people feel was just an attempt to cause problems in order to trade that for concessions in Philadelphia. If so, that worked. Either way, that's not a substantial element of the bridging agreement. Four, a certain amount of the prisoners released will be exiled. And five, related to this, Israel will have the right to veto the identity of 100 prisoners to be released. Four and five together are crucial. Because if you look at the Gilad Shalit deal, a lot of the senior leadership of Hamas and the people who planned October 7th were released in that deal. Most famously, Yehia Sinwar. So what this does is it allows Israel to veto those people who think would be a material strategic threat to Israel, and those who would be a tactical threat who it still allows out will be exiled. So that means that Israel will be able to, hopefully, through these terms, avoid a kind of reorganization of Hamas that will lead to masses of death in the next step, something that Netanyahu learned from his mistakes in the Shalit deal. Six, the IDF will redeploy in Gaza outside the big cities and highways, but will not leave the strip altogether. Hamas has wanted Israel to completely get out of Gaza in the first step, and that would have been a political victory for it. Israel doesn't want that. It wants to stay there. It wants to be able to impede Hamas to some extent and to be able to restart the war quickly if there's a violation or if talks over phase one fail. So on 6, it managed to get what it wanted. 7, talks on rebuilding Gaza will not begin until the first phase has been completed successfully. So that will only happen in phase 2. Of course, what Hamas wants is a guarantee. The war will end in phase 1 and to rebuild Gaza in phase 1. So what we have here is a very pro-Israel, slanted towards Israel agreement. It definitely favors the Israeli position, and we need to give a lot of credit to the Israeli team and to the government, Netanyahu, Gallant, for negotiating well. Negotiating well means playing hardball and getting a deal at the end. In the end, Israel got both of those things. Now, the problems. There's a lot of problems. First of all, among the 3 mediators, it doesn't look like Qatar has any problem with this, but Egypt might. Egypt has shown a real objection to Israel having a presence in Philadelphia. So what happens if they reject the bridging position? Do they stop being one of the mediators? And it certainly helps Hamas say no if Egypt is against the deal. So that's a loose end that really has to be examined. Hamas is, of course, displeased with the outcome. They seem to have predicted this outcome. They were already talking 2 days ago about how badly slanted this deal would be towards Israel. Hamas hasn't commented on the Israeli acceptance yet, but its officials have called the mediator's proposal fundamentally slanted towards Israel and providing Israel a cover for its continued aggression, quote unquote. So Hamas is almost certainly going to say no. Best case scenario, they agree to talk to the mediators on certain things, and maybe, again, the gaps will be bridged. But then will Israel agree to that? So it starts to become quite complicated. The Wall Street Journal says that Sinwar is actually not interested in these talks at all, and that he thinks that they're a bluff by Israel and by the United States and are going to go nowhere. So what he's planning to do is to escalate, to have Iran escalate, to have Hezbollah escalate, and he also wants to get terror attacks off the ground in the West Bank to create more pressure on Israel. So once again, Sinwar is going to do what he's tried to do throughout this entire war, which is bring attacks on Israel from all fronts to put the pressure on it. It's up to Israel to put pressure back on Sinwar militarily, to escalate the war in Gaza in order to push him into acceptance of this deal. Israel needs to have a carrot and a stick. The carrot is the deal and the many concessions in that deal. The stick has to be a serious escalation of the war in Gaza. Otherwise, Sinwar will just play for time trying to escalate elsewhere. It's good for Israel to escalate in Gaza, and it's good for Sinwar to escalate elsewhere. The Lebanese press is reporting that since Hamas is expected to say no, Hezbollah is going to remove all its restraints and escalate again. So the Iranian front, that alliance, your Hezbollahs, your militias, your IRGC, Tehran, all that, the Houthis are preparing for this to fail and preparing to escalate. So what we're looking at right now is a continuation of the war, possibly an escalation of the war, but one where Israel has the back of the United States, at least for a while, because it said yes to the proposal. So it's a good PR move. It doesn't look to me like there's going to be a deal coming out of this at all. Okay, so thank you for watching. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media, and consider listening to my history podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast. I'm now working on a new episode on the split between Judah and the Kingdom of Israel. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you here next time something interesting happens.